DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 96 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good brother, the guy that runs our Twitter page, and the biggest Superman fan that I know. It's Liam. Liam, welcome to week 2 of our second annual Elseworlds month. This month, of course, of Elseworlds cartoons being Elseworlds Superman cartoons.
Oh, yes, sir. And we kicked it off with the newest animated version of Superman last week with our review of the new Superman Red Sun movie. And that was certainly an interesting time, and certainly would invite people to go back and listen to that if they haven't at DCAUreview.com. But this week we're going back, way back in time to really the first ever animated version of this character, and it's a pretty fun trip in a time machine back to that era, and to really sort of what one could consider the golden age of not just comics but of animation in some ways as well.
For sure, absolutely. And of course, we are this week reviewing 2 of what have become known as the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. We have certainly referenced these several times in our 96 episodes, more often than not when we're talking about some of those Batman the Animated Series episodes, which we'll talk about why we reference those so often as we go through here. But these Max Fleischer cartoons are from 1941. So we're covering 2 of them, and that would be the very first 2 that they ever released. The first one, it was simply known as Superman, but was also later dubbed The Mad Scientist. And that one debuted in theaters before some sort of movie that was released, I guess. So movie theaters would show them before they shown the main feature. You know, nowadays when they show car commercials and commercials for Sprite, back in the day, our parents and grandparents were watching animated shorts of this new character Superman that had become so popular just a couple years before debuting in Action Comics, and Superman fever took over. So the very first one, which was dubbed Superman, as I stated, debuted on October the 26th, 1941. And then the second short that we'll be reviewing is what's known as the Mechanical Monsters. That one debuted on November 28th, 1941, putting both of these at just under 80 years old here. We're coming up on the 79th year anniversary coming up in October and November, Liam. Wow. So, yeah, it's crazy. And, I mean, we've hyped these up a lot. And before we get into talking about plot, before we get into breaking these down and doing reviews for them, I'd love to throw you in a time machine, Liam, and talk about your first exposure to these cartoons. Obviously, this is well before either of our time, but we have seen these before. We've been exposed to these, and that's sort of the magic of these cartoons. And as we'll talk as we go through and review these, but give me your memories of the first time that you remember seeing one of these cartoons.
Yeah, I guess my first memories would have been, I think we talked before on the show, we didn't have cable, but our grandparents did, and so when we go over there to their house, we would turn on the Cartoon Network as often as we could, and these shorts would play occasionally. Generally, it would be like if they aired a movie or something on Cartoon Network, and it ended at like a weird time. It would end at like, I don't know, it started at 3 p.m. and ended at 4:50, and they needed something to fill the 10 minutes until whatever show was coming on at 5 o'clock. They might air one of these or some other, or a Looney Tunes or something like that. But that's kind of the first time I remember seeing these, was just they were sort of time filler, little placeholder things that they would put on the Cartoon Network. And it wasn't really something that I thought of as being this classic old cartoon at the time. It was just, hey, it's this little Superman thing that airs sometimes. And of course, it's funny when you compare this to some of the other Superman cartoons, prior to the DCAU, prior to the sort of modern era of animation, and you look at some of the Hanna-Barbera stuff, the Super Friends, or the Filmation, New Adventures of Superman, and how sort of basic and low quality they are, and then you look at these incredible, and obviously we'll get into more specifics once we actually review our episodes here, our shorts here, but just the incredible quality of these shorts for their time, especially, is really something quite staggering.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that. Looking back and doing some research and looking at these, it's funny that DC Comics was looking to make money and capitalize off of this Superman fever, and we're looking to figure out ways to do that, and bringing Superman to animation was the way they went to go. So they came to Paramount, I believe, as the story goes, and Paramount came to Fleischer Studios, and which was run by a pair of brothers, and they go to the one brother and ask him to do the Superman stuff, and he had no interest in doing it. So his strategy, rather than just saying no, was to come back with an astronomical budget for each cartoon, and thinking that they would just turn him down, and then he could continue to work without really offending Paramount, I guess, or and DC, which was, I guess, National Comics at the time. So without sort of just turning them down flat out, they would politely decline and go find a cheaper studio. Well, of course, as we know, it turns out that I guess some negotiations happened. They were able to end up negotiating about half of that. Apparently, the very first Superman cartoon was a $50,000 budget, which was, from what I saw, 6 times the normal budget of a cartoon at that time, which is pretty crazy to behold. I think adjusted for inflation, I saw a number of something like $1.5 million per cartoon or something like that in today's day and age for these 10-minute shorts. Which, of course, nowadays maybe you wouldn't bat an eyelash at that at a Disney studio or something, putting that out for a 10-minute short. But thinking about this in terms of 1941 dollars, that's ridiculous. So, of course, the rest is history. These cartoons come out, and because of their high budget and their high quality and some of the techniques that Max Fleischer had developed, being able to get cartoons from a live action performance, he's credited with inventing a particular style. These beautiful cartoons were born from that. So it's, we'll get into that as we go into our plot, but it's funny that you say that, looking back, comparing these to ones that were later on, the 60s and the 70s and even in the 80s, comparing them across the board, you would think that the older ones would be the more recent creations as technology moved forward, but that simply wasn't the case, and speaks a lot about these particular episodes themselves. But I have a certainly similar memory and catching these on Cartoon Network, and we may have even had one get recorded on tape at some time and watched it on repeat a few times. But it's funny that that would have been in the 90s, so even 50 or 60 years later, these things were still being played on Cartoon Network, which at the time played its own original cartoons with some of those older cartoons at the time. But it's fascinating, the story of how these things came together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the really interesting thing is, obviously, Paramount being and Fleischer Studios being sort of the chief animation rival to Disney at the time. And Disney, while it's obviously such a treasure trove of classic animation, there was a certain style that Disney adhered to, and that, quite frankly, most cartoons adhere to. And when you watch these cartoons, the characters aren't bouncing. There isn't that looped animation where they're kind of constantly bouncing up and down. Like it was, as you mentioned, the techniques they created, where they would sort of they would film an actual human being doing an action, and then sort of animate and draw over top of that to create this very lifelike animation. Obviously, it was a game changer at the time, and then going forward, there you look at the impact these had. A lot of creators. Obviously, we're a DCAU podcast, and it's probably pretty well known if you're listening to this how much Bruce Timm and Eric Redon, a lot of the creators who worked on Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series, how much they were affected by these Fleischer cartoons. But, creators like Frank Miller and Alex Ross, some of the real, the mounts, a lot of people's Mount Rushmores of comic book creators, of artists and writers, cite these as motivation and inspiration for some of their greatest stories. So I think that really speaks to, as well, is not just how great they are, the techniques they pioneered, but also the cultural impact they had and how their impacting of some of the great creators of a more modern era would go on to affect comics as a whole and future iterations, whether that be live action or other cartoons of these characters going forward. So it's kind of that domino effect, and you can trace back a lot of probably what came out of modern comics and modern comic book animations to these Fleischer cartoons as well.
Yeah, man, it's I believe I saw it a couple of different places that they are actually credited with the ones that made Superman fly as opposed to just jumping. Mm-hmm. I think the story that I read, and I read it on I can't remember where I read it. I either read it on I read it in some article, I think, that was talking about these, but they had actually gotten tired of doing the motion of the Superman jump. So they just decided, and sort of the jump and then the landing spot, they got tired of animating that. So they just decided to make him fly, which obviously that went on to impact the Superman character forever.
Absolutely.
Because he went from a guy that just jumps tall buildings in a single bound to the dude that you'll believe that a man can fly,
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely some of that, and even some things like the musical cues and how those, along with the radio serials that were around at the time, and characters like Lois Lane and Perry White and Jimmy Olsen, who were sort of minor characters in those radio plays and in these cartoons, would go on to become kind of the main supporting cast in the comic books themselves as well. So again, there's always sort of that thing where the comic books inspire the animation or the movies or whatever, and then the movies and animation end up turning around and inspiring comics that come after them. So it's a very cyclical thing. And yeah, these cartoons are very, very integral to, I think, to the history of Superman as a whole.
I agree completely. Just for the listeners, if you're interested, these things are actually public domain, which is an interesting thing. And Liam, explain, maybe if people aren't familiar what public domain is, can you give a brief idea of what that means?
Well, basically, it doesn't really exist anymore. But there was a time when the government stated that after a certain amount of time, copyrights, intellectual properties should expire, because that would encourage artists and companies that create to have to innovate, make new things. Mm-hmm. And so thus things after a set amount of time would enter the public domain, meaning that anyone, in the same way that like a fairy tale, like Jack and the Beanstalk or mm-hmm. something, anyone can make a version of that, or a concept or a certain type of monster or something like that. Those are all public domain. Anyone can take that story or that property and adapt it into their own thing.
Sure.
And for whatever reason, obviously Paramount, and in cohesion with National Comics at the time, made these shorts. And then eventually Warner Brothers had the rights to them, and then basically didn't renew them, along mm-hmm. with some of the Filmation Superman animated episodes that I think came out in the later 60s. And they just, for whatever reason, decided not to renew the trademarks on them. And so these shorts, despite the fact, obviously, the character of Superman is very much not in the public domain. And if you really want to get real nerdy about it, there was Disney Corporation was very much involved in changing and lobbying to have copyright law changed so that things don't go into public domain.
Funny how that works.
that set time anymore. But yeah, and you can certainly read up on that. But yeah, for whatever reason, these Superman cartoons ended up in public domain, and that's why you may as you're listening to this remember seeing these maybe on like a dollar bin DVD, like at a
Yep.
Walmart or even a dollar store or something. And that's why, because no one really owns the rights to them. I believe it's stated that Warner Brothers, which of course is obviously the parent company of DC Comics, owns the original film reels now of these.
Mhm.
But as far as just the produced versions that exist in the world, they are considered public domain. And yeah, so you can actually find all of these shorts free on YouTube. You can, or if you prefer the old media, you can find them on discs for generally very little amount of money. So yeah, that's kind of a cool part of this. As weird as it is that this kind of one random piece of Superman media ended up in the public domain, it's cool because it means so many more people will get a chance to see it and experience it.
All right. Well, I think we've gone on long enough with the history lesson of these cartoons. Definitely encourage you, like Liam said, they're on YouTube. It's 17 of them in total. Like we said, we're only going to cover the first 2 today. We may cover more down the line if we ever decide to do another Elseworlds month, Liam. But we decided, like we said, to do the first 2. Now, it's before we go into our 4 categories that we always do: plot, animation and visuals, music, and voice. I will pull the curtain back a little bit and say that it's a little hard. This is another one of those ones where it's going to be a little bit hard to grade this against the normal scale, because we're talking about, yes, these are advanced for their time, but it's a cartoon from the 40s, which is very different from the cartoon in the 80s, 90s, or even 2000s.
Right, and it's, as we've mentioned, they're little shorts. They're not 9.5. If you eliminate the credits, it's probably 9.5 minutes long, and they're obviously meant to be, from a story perspective. They're pretty simplistic. There's not a lot of dialogue. So yeah, they're, as far as the actual analysis of these, it's not quite as easy to kind of sink your teeth into as our average review would be. I guess we can start getting into the first short here. As we mentioned, this was called Superman / the Mad Scientist.
Yeah. Do you have is there an IMDb synopsis for these things?
I'm glad you asked, Cal, because there absolutely is one.
Oh yeah.
And I will, in fact, give you the synopsis for The Mad Scientist, which was written by Seymour Knightle and Izzy Sparber, directed by Dave Fleischer, with music by Sammy Timberg. And that synopsis reads as such: The Man of Steel fights a mad scientist who is destroying Metropolis with an energy cannon.
There you go. I mean, it's a 9-minute short. That one is short and sweet and to the point.
Yeah, sometimes when we only get one sentence out of our IMDb synopses, that's a disappointment. But that does, in fact, accurately describe the plot of this piece here.
So as we open up, there's a scene that's sort of, and we'll talk about this as we go on, sort of things that you could see later on, influences in Batman the Animated Series or Superman the Animated Series. But the very first scene, Perry White receives a letter that from this mad scientist threatening that he's going to start destroying Metropolis. If I think he wants ransom money or something, from my recollection.
He just says it's revenge for the people who laughed at him or something.
Okay. Okay.
The guy
Sounds
got picked on in high school, and so he's going to blow up the city with an energy gun.
So the scene itself reminded me of one of our very, very early episodes. Can you guess what that one might be, Liam? POV, actually.
Oh, okay.
Just if you go back and you can listen to that episode in the archives at DCAUreview.com, there's an interrogation scene that has they're sitting at this table and the light's shining down, and we talk a lot about the Max Fleischer influence in that episode. So definitely go back and look at that. But it reminded me heavily of that. That was the first inkling I got. It was like, even though it's a completely different setting, it's just are completely different characters. There's no police. It's 3 characters sitting around this card table with a light shining down on them. Some great shadow work and stuff in there. But that opening scene reminded me of POV. Anyway, Superman and Lois are sent on the job, and I thought this was for a 1941 cartoon. This is very progressive in the fact that they let Lois Lane is like, no, I'm a woman, and it doesn't matter. I'm going out there, and I'm gonna get this story myself.
Well, a fun fact about that is that you are absolutely right. They're talking about what they should do, and Perry's like, hey, take Clark with you, go together to get the scoop on this guy. And she's like, no, I'm just going to go. And the original recording of the line was Clark Kent says, don't you think this is a dangerous assignment for a girl? And in subsequent versions that have been released, they sort of cut the line at, don't you think this is a dangerous assignment? But to your point, even with that line thrown in, even if that was still there, yeah, they established that Lois is capable, although she does immediately get captured upon arriving at the island.
Hey, but she flies a plane, dang it.
She does, which is, I mean, that's very random, but it was, yeah, she just runs and jumps in a plane and flies to this island. I guess there's an island on the outskirts of Metropolis in this world. It's where,
isn't that where the nuclear fallout happens in Superman the Animated Series?
Yeah, okay, all right. It's canon. There's an island just on the outskirts of Metropolis, but yeah, she goes there and gets captured, and this mad scientist and his wacky anthropomorphized bird are being very menacing, and he turns on his giant laser, his prototype Death Star laser, and begins attacking Metropolis. And Superman, and there's about 3 minutes straight where it's just Superman punching a laser. He awesome.
Gets hit. Yeah, he gets hit by it, and he like falls back, and he's just getting pounded into the ground by this laser.
Yes.
And then of course, rises from the dust and starts beating the laser back, but not before the is that when the laser hits what appears could have been the Daily Planet? I'm not sure, but a giant tall building.
Yes, the building begins to sway, and Superman has to come and catch it and push it back, and then it starts going the other way, so he has to catch it going the other way, and then he has to sort of fly up to or jump up. I'm sorry, because in these early ones he's still just leaping,
right?
And he has to leap up to the top of the building and kind of steady it. So I think this was also something, I know they mentioned that in sort of in the Bible of the Superman the Animated Series show, and Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and Alan Burnett were making that show about how one of the things they wanted to take was to not have Superman be so impervious to pain, or that it's not interesting, and
right.
How the Fleischer cartoons, while showing that he was still, invincible and more powerful than a locomotive and all that jazz, and we see that in both of the shorts, as we'll get to in visuals. But Superman kind of struggles for a minute. He's not instantly invincible, standing there with his hands on his hips.
That tickles, yeah.
Right. He's not shrugging it off. Like, he has to struggle and kind of fight. And yeah, as you mentioned, he's getting knocked back by this laser, and he really has to kind of, dig down deep and fight it off. And then, of course, he does, and he destroys the laser, and is able to save Lois and grab the scientist and just tosses him right in jail. And no trials.
No trial needed. Yep. Speaking of authoritarian Superman.
Yes. And then we get a nice little recurring thing, which is Clark and Lois discussing what has just happened, and Lois talking about, none of this could have happened without Superman, and then Clark gets to wink at the camera.
Love it. Breaking the fourth wall.
I guess we could mention really quickly, just before we give our scores for the plot of this first one, they also do a very brief Superman origin at the beginning of this first one. They show Krypton blowing up and the rocket coming to Earth. Although they do curiously choose to omit the Kents.
Yeah, he gets raised in an orphanage.
Yes, and then just finds out he has powers and goes and becomes a reporter. So that was kind of an odd wrinkle, but
the other thing I caught was that they mentioned that the planet Krypton was a race of Supermen, that it was that they were fully developed. They don't mention that he gets his powers from the yellow sun. I correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember if that was established in the original comic, that he got his powers from the sun, if that was immediately canon.
I think that was maybe added a little bit later on.
Okay. But that, I thought that was something that was, it's like, oh, so he had his powers because he was born on a planet where they all had powers. So yeah, interesting. But yeah, it was interesting that they omitted the Kents there. But anyway, let's talk about our plot score for this, Liam. I gave our first episode here a plot score of 5 out of 10. It's fine. It's right in the middle. It's a little bit goofy. There's not a lot of development of the villain. Of course, it's 9 minutes, so take that with a grain of salt. 5 out of 10. What about you?
Yep, I gave it the exact same score of 5 out of 10.
5 out of 10. All right. Now, Liam, we'll talk about visuals and animation. As we've already alluded to several times, these things are gorgeous.
Yes.
And way ahead of where they should have been for this time frame.
Yeah, and it's really incredible, as we've already mentioned, sort of the pioneering animation styles that were used. But yeah, even the sort of the more traditional animation. Because obviously they didn't have an ability to have an actual human being do most of the things that Superman does in this cartoon. So even the more sort of traditionally cartoony moments are really quite incredible. And as we kind of mentioned, there's this sort of extended sequence where he's having to battle this giant laser, and the way he keeps getting knocked down and goes to stand up, and then it hits him and he falls back down, and you see he just keeps having issues with it, and finally he's able to come back, and as we mentioned, he just starts punching the laser back, and finally creates it. But even some of the more minor things, like some of the explosion effects they use when the laser is first turned on, and we see a bridge blow up, and like we mentioned, the building kind of swaying back and forth. And you already mentioned how this sort of look inspired Batman the Animated Series. But yeah, there's pretty much every time we see the Daily Planet, it's just there's not a lot of detail in the backgrounds, but there's what is important to see is very vibrant and colorful and really eye catching.
Absolutely. I think the spot, I have a spot in each of these episodes that really stood out to me, but the spot that stood out to me as just being a gorgeous piece of animation is when he beats the laser finally back into he beats it all the way back to the source, and it causes this chain reaction and causing it to explode. And he comes up through this sort of, the gun actually sort of resembles a gun that is used in the Christmas with the Joker episode, by the way, mixed with a few elements of Hardak. I thought there were some similarities between there, but he rips open the two sides where the barrel of the giant weapon is sticking out, and there's sort of like a lightning effect almost. There's a flash of lightning that happens, and he pulls these two walls aside and steps through. I was like, oh, that's so gorgeous. It's right out of a comic book panel. Yeah, it was great. And I think unsurprisingly, I gave a perfect 10 out of 10 for so many reasons for this episode. What about you?
Yeah, and I'm right in that same ballpark there. I also gave it a 10 out of 10.
There you go. All righty, Liam. All right, let's move on to music here. One of the things that we will go ahead and put out and say here is that back in the 40s and 30s and 50s when they did cartoons, they didn't really have a lot of dead air sound. I don't know why that was. I don't know if they didn't want to pay for sound effects or what have you, but there is nonstop music in this episode from the beginning of the cartoon all the way to the end, pretty much, with the exception of when he says more powerful than a locomotive, I think. But from the time that the Superman theme kicks into the end, it's almost nonstop music the entire time, which it could have used some time to breathe. And I get it. I think it was the style of that era, but I think it could have used some space to breathe.
Yeah, I agree. Especially it's at some point, and part of that is just because, unfortunately, even though there have been some remastered versions of these, the sound quality is still not great, and the music is the vocal tracks are not mixed particularly well compared to the music. So a lot of times the music is kind of really over the top and really going for it, and it's almost so loud that you can kind of barely understand what the people are saying. Especially
it's a little muddy
when the mad scientist is talking to Lois as after he's captured her. It's really kind of it's just the sound quality as a whole, which obviously isn't the musician's fault, but it's just not great. That being said, I do really love this Superman theme. As we mentioned, it's pretty iconic, and it was in fact, after these shorts, it was eventually adapted to be the theme of the radio serials, which continued on all the way into the 1950s. So it's certainly good, and I think the music, when it works really well. The music swelling as Superman is finally in action towards the end of the episode, and saving the day is well done. But yeah, I definitely think there's something to what you're saying about how it's just going and going and going the whole time.
Yeah, I agree completely. The Superman theme is strong. I think overall, though, it's just for that era. It's very typical, but it just wasn't my cup of tea overall. Like the rest of the music, I love the Superman theme, and I love when it comes in, and I love the impact that it makes. But the rest of it, it's just filler that was needless to me. So I gave music a 6 out of 10. What about you?
I give it a 7 out of 10. That breaks our streak here. But okay. I think, like I said, I think it's good, but maybe just a little too much.
Gotcha. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category for this first episode, and that's going to be voice acting. Not a big cast here, but we do have some players that have played other famous characters. Let's talk about our voice cast.
Yeah, so we have Jackson Beck, who plays the announcer, he's played the announcer in a lot of different stuff over the years, including other Superman cartoons and G.I. Joe cartoons as well. Jackson Beck is his name. Also played the rival of Popeye, which, depending on the version was either called Brutus or Bluto. But so a great veteran voice actor, and another sort of Paramount Studios animation Fleischer Studios guy. And speaking of Popeye, we had Jack Mercer playing the mad scientist, and it's once it's Popeye, you really can't unhear
it. Yeah, you were ready for him to pop out some spinach and
Yeah, you definitely get a little bit of that. So you have Joan Alexander as Lois Lane, and again, it's a small role, but again, for the time when we're grading on a curve, I like that this version of Lois still feels very true to the Lois Lane character, and she's still very, she's still very spunky and confident, despite it being 1941.
Sure, absolutely.
And then we have Bud Collyer playing Superman, who, as you mentioned, he, along with Joan Alexander, voiced Superman, and obviously Joan Alexander voiced Lois, not Superman.
Right.
On those radio serials of the 1940s and 50s, and I think Bud Collyer actually voiced Superman again on some of the Filmation Adventures of Superman shorts from the 60s as well. And the thing that I really zeroed in on, and that I remember watching these, and then which also made me remember those old recordings of the radio shows we got to hear growing up, which is that his whole thing is much like Kevin Conroy's Bruce Wayne and Batman have quite different voices. Bud Collier's Clark Kent is kind of just a normal guy, maybe a little bit of a higher voice, and then mid-sentence he will shift into his Superman voice, and it'll be, "This is a job for Superman," and that's when you know it's on.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. It's a classic trope. You didn't really get that in Superman the Animated Series, like you said. Certainly, Batman the Animated Series, you get that a lot. But yeah, that's a cool homage that they did to that, certainly in the Batman cartoon. Yeah, I think that even though, like you said, there's not a lot of voice acting that has to happen here, I think that the people are casted well. I think they fit their parts well, and the lines that Superman / Clark Kent, actually Superman, I don't think talks at all, other than when he says this looks like a job for Superman, and then it's strictly Clark Kent. I think it's fine. There was nothing that particularly blew me away, but I think it's a fine performances all the way around. I gave it a 6 out of 10. What about you?
I also gave it a 6 out of 10.
All right, perfect. All right, so that will bring our totals for me, that gives me for the first episode here, Liam, a total of 27 out of 40. What about you?
I have a very different 28 out of 40.
All righty, there we go. All right, well, let's move on to our second episode, Liam, which is going to be what's known as the Mechanical Monsters, as we said. So this one has a different plot, but probably the same amount of dialogue or less than the first episode. So let's get the IMDb synopsis for this Superman short.
Yes, and I'll do my best to imitate Bud Collier's Superman as my voice changes mid-sentence, as this is the IMDb synopsis. Superman battles a criminal mastermind and his robot army.
Oh, they sort of let us down. Who wrote who wrote this one and the music for this one?
We have, as according to IMDb, it's the exact same credits there. We have the writers are credited as Seymour Neidl and Izzy Sparber. We have directed by Dave Fleischer, and the music was by Sammy Timberg.
Gotcha. All right, so this one is basically the plot of I don't know, when did drones become a big thing? Was that like 2011, 2012? I forget when drones. Anyway, this guy gets an army of drones and sends them to rob banks, and Superman has to stop them.
Yeah, it's interesting, in that once again it's a very simple idea. You know, evil man with robots for Superman to fight. But and again, we'll get more into visuals of it, but they actually come up with kind of a creative way of giving Superman a bit more of a challenge, in that he's there at this museum opening as Clark Kent, and Lois Lane is also there. So when the robot shows up, he's not able to turn to Superman. Instead, he goes into, I thought he was going to call the police, but he calls Perry White instead to tell him about the scoop, I guess. I hope Perry called the police, but but while Clark is on the phone, Lois decides to get a closer look and ends up becoming a stowaway in this robot's loot compartment. Superman has to then give chase to it. We get to see him use his X-ray vision for the first time, and which, by the way, shout out to Dollar in the Bad Episode Jar Unity, because I guess that's the homage that they were going for. We were flabbergasted. If you listen to it in the archives, that's one of our worst rated episodes of all time. But we're just flabbergasted by this. They defeat the monsters in that episode using this X-ray vision that looks like heat vision, and we had never seen it before. And when I watched this, I was like, oh, he's doing the thing that they did in Unity. Yeah, because generally you don't really think of Superman's X-ray vision as like him firing radiation out of his eyes.
it's not a projectile, right? It just sort of happens.
Right. It's not. It's that's one of those things you try not to think about the specifics of it too much because it doesn't really make sense. But yeah, here we see him definitely fire the X-ray radiation, I guess, out of his eyes, and he sees Lois is trapped inside, and he gets knocked down. He gets caught in some power lines, and then finally has to break free, and we get to see Superman versus a bunch of robots, and then he kind of comes back at the end and saves the day. And a lot of the specifics of this plot we'll probably get to more in visuals, but I like this one a little bit better just because I liked the setup of it better. I felt like this was more of a challenge, and actually having physical things for Superman to punch, I think were a little more fun than watching him punch energy in the last one.
I concur. I think that the plot, first of all, we get maybe the first appearance, certainly the first appearance in animation of the classic Superman into the phone booth to change into the Superman costume, which we'll talk about in visuals for sure. But we get that, and certainly the plot itself. I was actually brought back to another episode of Batman the Animated Series with that very first scene. So if you recall, in the Beware the Gray Ghost episode, the very opening scene of that show, there you hear the buzz. There's like this, Bruce is watching the Gray Ghost episode, I think, and that you hear the buzz of the remote control cars that the Mad Bomber is using, and it's just this low hum, and you don't see what's causing it, and then the explosion happens. And of course, that's a major plot point in that episode, is what's the buzz coming from. But in this, you just hear this low hum, and it reminded me of that. It brought me back to that episode of like, oh, there's this low hum and all you see is a shadow, so you're not sure what it is. Is it an airplane? It also reminded me the sound itself sort of echoes the sound that they applied to the bat plane itself in Batman the Animated Series. Yeah,
that's definitely a great point. It's interesting. Yeah, we don't open with Superman or with Clark and Lois. We get this little cold open, as you mentioned, of you just see a bank get broken into, and then the shadow of the robot flying away. So that was really, really well done. Even though it's only a 10-minute short, it builds a little bit of anticipation of what exactly is going on here and what's going to go down when Superman actually gets to confront these things. But I guess we can give our scores for plot here and move on to what we really want to talk about, which is all the cool visual stuff.
Right.
But I gave plot 6 out of 10 for this one. Like I said, I think it's constructed a little bit better than the first one, and I like this one a little bit better.
I do not disagree with you. I enjoy this one a lot better. I think that the plot works, and like you said, seeing Superman actually battling these 20-some or whatever it is mechanical monsters that he has to fight, and then as we'll talk about in visual, saving Lois from the molten lava was a great visual also. And of course, with a tight little bow on the end of Lois getting the byline and mentioning that it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Superman, and Clark just giving the all shucks again, kind of nodding his head. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. So let's move on to visuals and animation, Liam. Wow. I don't know what to say about how great this episode is.
It's awesome. And so you mentioned that you had some flashbacks to certain episodes, and 2 that really stick out, as we mentioned, that little cold open they do when you see the silhouette of the robot flying. I was kind of taken back to On Leather Wings. The opening to the very first ever episode produced of Batman the Animated Series, On Leather Wings. You, along with the music, you see the silhouette of Man-Bat flying through Gotham.
Good call.
You just see, you don't get to see the actual monster yet. You just see the wings flapping as he's passing by, passing buildings and stuff. It's really, really cleverly done. And also had a flashback to a specific Superman episode, and I feel like he gets electrocuted a lot.
Yep.
But I believe it's in particular there's an episode where he's dealing with power lines, and he's holding up the steel scaffolding, he's getting electrocuted at the same time. I want to say that might be the first Bizarro episode.
Maybe. Yeah, I think it is.
I know he's involved in power lines in that Bizarro episode. I'm not sure if that's the one I'm thinking of or not, but definitely you can see some of the, and again, like we talked about in the first short here, we get to see him. He's sort of knocked down by the robot, and he falls into these power lines, and the robot kind of gets away for a minute as he's trapped in these lines and he's being electrocuted. And again, we get to see Superman kind of struggle and have to work hard he has to kind of break each wire individually to get free so that he can go after these robots and save Lois. And that scene of him struggling in as he's being electrocuted in the power lines is so stunning and so well done.
Yeah, that one is ingrained in my brain as like thinking about the first time. This must have been the first one that I ever saw, because when I think about the Max Fleischer Superman, I literally think about him struggling as he's tied up in the electrical lines, trying to stand up and breaking free of them. Like, that's the visual that I have in my head. So just an iconic image there. And there's a lot of animation, beautiful animation when the monster lands at the museum where this pile of jewelry is on display, by the way, and talk about the pile of jewelry, the mountain of jewelry. But they show the police there, and they have these old Tommy guns that they're shooting at the monsters. And it's done as, we talked about how their animation style of taking live action and animating over top of it, that Max Fleischer, is responsible for creating. But it was done so well because it looks like it's straight out of a movie. You get this shot directly at the gun barrel, sort of shooting at you and looking into the policeman's eyes as he realizes this mechanical monster isn't stopping, and he has to jump out of the way as it busts through the glass. Just a great shot. And as I mentioned before, the shot of Superman's silhouette as he's changing in the phone booth, which would become an iconic, certainly trope of Superman going forward, that played out, of course, in many other iterations. Maybe most famously in the Superman live action movie with Christopher Reeve. But that's a Superman thing. When you think about Superman changing from Clark Kent to Superman, it's probably going to be in a phone booth. So to see that in cartoon form in its very first iteration here is pretty special. But that, and at the very last, to me, the most visually stunning probably part of this episode is when Superman finally gets in to save Lois. He's defeated the mechanical monsters, and he's trying to save Lois. The scientist throws her down to this cavern and is going to pour this molten hot melted metal on top of her and Superman has to stand there and allow the metal to sort of just pour over top of him as he protects Lois. It's just, wow, beautiful animation.
He pulls out his cape so that none of the metal hits her, and it's just, it's such an iconic image. And I want to say, I feel like this was vaguely recreated in something live action. I don't remember if it's Batman v Superman.
Could be.
But there's something where he kind of stands there with his arms out over someone. But it's that kind of reminded me of this. But yeah, it's such a visually striking moment. And again, the animation itself is again, we talked about, it's just so fluid, and but again, it's while still feeling very vibrant and real. You don't have that sort of looped animation where people are bouncing up and down or sort of moving for no reason. Like, everything feels very deliberate and on purpose. And the speed of Superman having to jump down there and then throw out his cape and throw out his arms to protect Lois it's so well done.
Beautiful episode. No choice, 10 out of 10.
Agreed. Yeah, 10 out of 10. I think the thing I was thinking of is I think it was actually on Supergirl. They did that with on one of the episodes where Superman guest starred on it. I think, ironically enough, there were drones attacking random citizens, and Superman kind of stands there with his back to the drone, and throws out his arms and his cape to protect citizens from it. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's what that was directly homaging, but it did make me think of that as I was watching it. So yeah, that's like we said, both were really fun and really great, but this one just had, I think, just several more single moments or more iconic images. What with him, like we said, him struggling with the power lines, him protecting Lois from the molten metal, and then just the sort of simple fun of watching him tear those robots apart. It's lots and lots of fun.
For sure. All right, Liam, let's move on to music here. Very similar to the first episode. I feel like maybe I noticed the music a little bit less, which I think is a compliment to the second one here. Similar era. It's the same era, so music played the same sort of role and filled in a lot. But I felt like the Superman theme, when it comes in, was very powerful. Certainly punctuates the scenes very, very well, especially the scene of him in the power lines, and certainly again when he saves Lois from the mechanical monsters and he's going through battling the army of monsters that are attacking him. So I gave it a little bit stronger in this episode, 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, and I'm right in that same ballpark. I went 6 out of 10 for this one. So
gotcha.
Like I said, I think it's good. Kind of the same pluses and minuses that we talked about in the last one.
For sure. All right, and our final category is going to be voice acting again. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's probably a lot of the same people that we talked about in the first episode.
Yeah, literally the same. They only really listed the 3 main actors of the piece, one of which being Jackson Beck as the announcer. The only other 2 voice actors who got credit in this one were Joan Alexander as Lois and Bud Collyer as Superman. So yeah, it's a very small crew, and as we mentioned, there aren't a lot of dialogue here. But like I said, I liked sort of Clark as Clark Kent. He's kind of standing there staring at the robots at the start of the episode, and Lois has to like pull him out of the way, and they're like, "Hey, idiot, get out of the way! There's a giant robot coming at you." And again, him kind of having to try to not be Superman in front of Lois or the rest of the people at the museum, I think is fun and well done. But yeah, again, not a ton of dialogue, but I think it's enjoyable enough.
Yeah, I gave it the same score I gave the last episode. I gave a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it 7. Like I said, I think I liked that exchange at the beginning of the episode between Clark and Lois. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. All right, Liam. So that will bring us to our final scores for this episode. So totaling everything up, I gave the second episode a 30 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark, 29 out of 40.
All right, there we go. And I guess now we'll talk about rewatchability, which is hard to do for this one. I mean, they're 10-minute fun shorts. I've seen these probably half a dozen times or maybe more in my lifetime. I guess that speaks to rewatchability that, hey, if you want to watch some beautiful animation, you want to get some good Superman action, and you don't want to invest a lot of time, pull up YouTube and watch these.
Yeah, I think because of the ease of accessibility that we talked about at the top of the show, these are definitely worth checking out. If you've never seen them, but or if it's been a while since you've watched them. Just for the visuals alone, it's worth taking a look at. And like we said, it's not a big time commitment. So yeah, I would say I would give these a thumbs up.
Cool. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to the end of our episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for this week. We thank you for checking us out. Don't forget, as Liam said, you can check out last week's episode in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app. You can check out our review of Superman Red Son, which just was released from Warner Animation. So the most recent Superman animation we reviewed last week, as Liam said, we bookended it here with the oldest iteration of Superman animation. So definitely check that out. Don't forget to follow Liam. He runs our Twitter page at DCAU Review. You can also follow us on Instagram at DCAU Review. Liam, we have a Instagram giveaway contest that we're doing. We're trying to give away the 2020 Hot Wheels Bat Plane. We need, as of today, as of recording time, we need 75 followers to get to 300. Once we do that, we'll select one of our followers to win that Bat Plane. We also have an exciting Twitter contest we're running as of today, aren't we?
Yes. So we're actually giving away, we have a little Superman keychain that we'll be giving out in honor of Elseworlds Superman month. And to enter that contest, to make it real simple, all you got to do is head to twitter.com, follow us at DCAU Review. Once you're following us, all you have to do is retweet our pinned tweet. It will be a tweet about this episode that you're listening to right now. All you got to do is retweet that and follow us, and you're automatically entered to win.
That's right. It's a very Max Fleischer-esque Superman keychain. So we're celebrating Superman month with different iterations of Superman. But excited to give some stuff away. We love our fans. Thanks for following us on social media. If you already do, just give that the old retweet, and you'll be entered to win. Thanks for all of our new listeners. We've picked up some new ones recently. We love you guys. Thanks for checking us out. Don't forget, if you have time, leave us a 5-star review if you can on whatever podcast app that you listen to us on. Make sure you like, subscribe, and tell your friends about this podcast, because we would love to get more people, more ears on the product. Liam, before we go, can we talk about next week's week 3 of Elseworlds Superman? What are we going to be talking about next week?
Yeah, so next week we are returning to a show we've actually talked about a couple of times before, including last year in our Elseworlds Batman month. We are returning to the world of the Batman, the Brave and the Bold cartoon, and we will be reviewing the first Superman episode that was ever featured in that series. That episode is, of course, called Battle of the Superheroes.
Awesome, man. I think we've mentioned on those episodes, we've done 2 episodes of that, of course, from producer James Tucker, who worked on Justice League and some of Batman Beyond, I think. But yeah, so from his world, I have minimal exposure to that, but I've enjoyed sort of the love letter to the Silver Age that is. So I look forward to seeing the inclusion of one Clark Kent / Superman into that world. Yeah,
that's definitely going to be fun, and that'll be just yet another one. And after that, we've still got 2 more weeks left, so excited to review Batman, the Brave and the Bold's version of Superman next week, and then look at a couple more versions to finish out the month.
Absolutely. So yeah, we'll look forward to that. We'll be excited to kick that off with another episode next week in our Elseworlds month. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on that next episode of the DCAU Review.
Goodbye.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. This amazing stranger from the planet Krypton. The Man of Steel. Superman. Empowered with X-ray vision, possessing remarkable physical strength, Superman fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice, disguised as a mild-mannered newspaper reporter, Clark Kent.